FDA gets an enormous number of requests on a daily basis on recalls, product approvals, contamination episodes, all manner of things. If all of that has to go through a communications staff downtown, it will be like an LA freeway at the height of rush hour. And that's not serving the public.
Hello, I'm Wayne Pines, and welcome to bonus episode 3 of FDA Watch.
And I'm Shelly Garg, and this is our first ever breaking news bonus episode, or as they say in media today, it's a breaker.
Everybody in the FDA world knows generally what's going on. Dr. Marty Makary is starting at FDA as commissioner. He will have about 80%, eventually 80% of the previous FDA staff to work with, because the agency is in the process of cutbacks involving 3,500 jobs. And actually, it could involve more people than that because a number of people already have left. The announcement by HHS said the cutbacks will be focused on IT, procurement, HR, communications, and similar functions, and not on drug and device reviewers or inspectors. Those of us who have worked at FDA know that you can't think about it that way, because if IT or procurement or HR communications is cut back or consolidated in HHS, it obviously will have an impact on everything that the agency does. The reduction seems to be occurring on a program basis. Entire programs are being eliminated. We do not know exactly which programs yet. We're also seeing a major brain drain at all levels. Some of the most important officials, such as Dr. Patrizia Cavazzoni, the director of CDER, and now Peter Marks, the director of CBER, have both resigned. The loss of Peter Marks is a very significant one. He is the one who orchestrated the review and the development of the COVID vaccine. He has orchestrated a major program in terms of cell and gene therapy at the agency. A lot of the advances that are occurring in medicine occur in the cell and gene therapy area. And of course, his position on vaccines, which he has expressed many times, is very important to the public health. I'm sure Nancy and Stuart will have more to say about Peter. Joining us today, our guests are two former FDA officials. Nancy Myers is the founder of the consulting firm Catalyst Health. She served at FDA in the Office of the Commissioner and the Center for Drugs. Stuart Pape is the head of the Food and Drug Practice at the law firm Polsinelli, and formerly was Associate Chief Counsel for Foods. Welcome, Nancy. Welcome, Stuart.
Thank you, Wayne and Shelly.
Let me start by asking Nancy, what should drug and device companies be doing now to address the changes at FDA?
Wayne, that's a great question. A lot of people are starting to ask. I think there are a couple things that the companies can do. One is staying informed. This is like drinking from a fire hose of news these days, especially around the FDA front. You've got news on the FDA workforce cuts. You've got organizational changes being discussed. You've got there have been executive orders that will, and some memos from OPM and from HHS saying how they're going to run the agency differently. So just keeping up to speed on the issues is going to be hard, but it's definitely worth it. I think for companies that have applications in front of the agency, really paying attention to looking at what's happening with retirements, and use your LinkedIn to watch who's doing what. But knowing what, if you've got an application in front, you really want to take time to make sure you're communicating with your project managers. You want to make sure that you're, if they're unresponsive, raising it up the chain. So I think there's a lot that, depending on where you are in the stage, if you're monitoring, monitor well. But if you're in the middle of something, make sure, it is a time where it's an unprecedented time. And you're going to want to speak up if there's some delay or if you're having some challenge at the agency.
Let me just ask one question. Have you seen any delays among your own clients thus far?
Of course not, Wayne. My clients would be and that's Catalyst Healthcare Consulting. No, no. Um, but we have not seen it. There are some anecdotes out there, but I think that's one of the greatest challenges that people are having in a time where it's supposed to be very transparent. It's not. There isn't a mechanism to really see a slowdown in a very short period of time like this.
Thanks, Nancy. Stuart, let me ask the same question on the food side. Do you see a disproportionate impact on food regulation, and how should the food industry react?
I do, Shelley. I see it in two ways. One is that uh, foods is unsupported for all practical purposes by user fees,
Yeah.
and so the historically when there's been a reduction in FDA personnel, or funding, foods disproportionately takes the hit. I fully expect that to happen here. The other angle is that both that the secretary, HHS Secretary Kennedy, has made making big changes in food regulation a priority. That's not only a first, I think, from a HHS secretary. It's probably also a first from an FDA commissioner because Dr. Makary has sung out of the same hymnal. Most of the time, FDA commissioners show up and have to be reminded that the F in FDA stands for food. Um, they've already gone after colors, the synthetic colors. Um, Secretary Kennedy met 2 weeks ago with food industry CEOs and basically said, "I want these colors out." Um, the food companies may have no choice. We are now up to 4 states:
Yeah.
California, Utah, Virginia, and West Virginia, that have enacted bans of one sort or another on these synthetic colors. And as everybody knows, you companies don't make food for particular states; they make it for nationwide markets. So, for companies, I don't know what the tipping point is. We may have already passed that for in terms of the colors.
And Stuart, there's typically, and I agree with you, but there's typically grace periods that FDA has, enacted for final rules, et cetera. Here, just given the direction that the states are taking, and the quickness in which FDA is reacting or enforcing, you know, practically speaking, like producing label inventory and reformulating. I mean, just how do you recommend companies proceed? Is it ultra conservative? Is it sort of somewhere in the middle?
Well, you have to pay attention to the effective dates in the state statutes. I think
Yeah,
West Virginia has been pretty precise on when that ban on the colors kicks in. So you got to
sure.
comply with that. I think it would be highly dangerous, ill advised to assume that the states are going to give you breaks or extend
Yeah,
effective dates. I think more broadly, the challenge, though, Shelley, is that you have to figure out what are you going to do beyond the synthetic colors.
right.
If there were ready, affordable, useful, functional alternatives to these synthetic colors, companies would have been ahead of the curve and would already be using them. And the fact that they aren't tells me that there are both supply and technical challenges. You may go
Yeah,
from bright red to pastel,
right,
and
right.
you got to be working on those technological challenges so that you can continue to produce product when these bans take effect.
Yeah,
Let me bounce back to drugs and devices, Nancy. If a company were to face a delay, let's say the agency called and said, "Look, we're down people in this division. We're not going to meet your PDUFA date." What does a company do? They've got obligations to investors, they've got obligations to patients, they've got other commitments. It could be a disaster for a company, especially a small company, if that happens.
Yeah, Wayne, that's a great question. I think what people have to do is, first of all, take a deep breath. They have to understand the changes that are happening at the FDA and have a little grace. And then they need to call, they need to call and start talking to one, their project manager. And if they don't get satisfaction there, then they need to elevate it up through the chain until they get someone who will kind of listen. I think that's something that if you have a layoff that is as large as it's said, it very likely will impact the timing. And so looking, one of the things that we're advising our clients is kind of as you are starting to set up meetings with the agency and you are getting, you're finding out who's going to be in your meetings, cross check that with the people that were in your previous meetings and make sure that if there is an area where you have someone that you have a area of expertise that you're missing on your next meeting, make sure you put that into the PM to say, listen, we need to make sure someone from toxicology is on this one. Or so try to monitor it yourself because the agency is going to do its best to to meet its need, to meet the standards that are required, but they are going to struggle. And so it's going to be on the onus is going to be on the sponsor to try to help, move this along as easily as possible. But there are going to have to be some squeaky, very gentle wheels.
Just a follow-up question to both of you. The three of us worked at FDA, and we know that when we hear that HR or IT is now going to be consolidated outside of FDA, we know how challenging that is because FDA has unique IT and unique HR needs. Talk a little bit about that issue and why the consolidation of some of these what I call backroom functions. It's not medical reviews. It's IT. It's HR. Really could be very problematic for the agency and could affect the entire agency. Nancy, let me start with you, and then Stuart.
Sure. That the pendulum on these things swings every couple of years. For the last several years, FDA commissioners have tried desperately to move the HR function back to FDA and trying to make it more streamlined. Because when FDA is hiring, they're trying to get the best and the brightest to join the federal government. And to do that, you have to move quickly and you have to be clear on what your needs are. And so there's been a feeling that when HR is taken out of the FDA, that typical HR folks don't understand the scientific needs and can't screen those people and move them as quickly. So that is something that FDA has been working on. That was probably one of the improvements that we'd seen is that FDA was running their own HR. So this kind of steps back, and so that's something that people are going to have to, the new administration is really going to have to watch to make sure things don't slow down if they start hiring for critical positions.
Much of this has been tried before and it found not to work. How long it takes for the current administration to realize that it's not working is anybody's guess, but it's on top of all of the other changes. This change is likely to further impair the agency's ability to function, to recruit and retain good people. Included in this, Wayne, is moving comms communications down to the department. That will never work. FDA gets an enormous number of requests on a daily basis on recalls, product approvals, contamination episodes, all manner of things. If all of that has to go through a communications staff downtown, it will be like an LA freeway at the height of rush hour, and that's not serving the public.
Yeah, what's happened in the past, because I went through that myself, is that HHS wants to see every press release. What they learned quickly is that a lot of the press releases are not policy; they're just pure facts. It's a recall, it's a product approval, and they get frustrated because they have to look at these and they don't make any changes because they don't have any basis for making any changes. So. Very quickly, they reverse and say, no, just go ahead and issue those. Let us know if there's anything that really might affect us. So, as Stuart said, a lot of what's been tried in terms of consolidation has been tried in the past and just hasn't worked.
Stuart, just one question going back to the food side. given the staffing shortages and the cutbacks, but then simultaneously FDA's role in really regulating, um, newer food programs, food ingredients, additives, and other kind of fast-paced evolution of food trends, such as GMOs, plant-based, lab-grown, products. How do you see FDA sort of keeping up with innovation while having these types of staffing shortages?
Well, I'm not sure I do, Shelley.
Yeah,
I think one of the challenges here is going to be, um, look, the particularly in the food side, I think they're going to be more conservative, at least in the short term, in terms of giving companies feedback on novel food ingredients. And I've got several I'm working on with clients, and I fully expect them to be a little bit less, maybe a lot less forthcoming as they sort of try and figure out what new leadership, what direction new leadership wants to take. It's not clear to me that either the commissioner or the secretary are favor innovative novel food ingredients.
yeah,
And if I'm a reviewing scientist in what used to be called the Office of Food Additive Safety, under the Human Foods Reorganization, it's got some ridiculously long name, Office of Chemical blah 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 and Dietary Supplements. Um, I'm not making any bold moves until I figure out what leadership wants me to do.
yeah,
Making a bold move that could turn out, maybe it's right, maybe it's scientifically right, maybe it's right from the standpoint of the statute, maybe it's politically wrong. Um, that's
yeah.
career people aren't going to be making those calls until they see which way the leadership wants them to go. And I think that's likely to be true, Nancy, on the medical side of FDA as well.
Well, I think that on the medical side, because the patients are clamoring for new innovation and technology, perhaps it's a little bit different. I think that Dr. Makary is coming into the agency saying that he wants to see common sense streamlining of regulation and that he likes a lot of this innovation. He hasn't said he likes innovation, but I assume that he does. And so I think that's where we'll have to see if there are fewer people able to do the reviews or fewer people at the agency, you may not have the extra time at the agency to help new technologies understand the next steps that the agency expects from them. There are a lot of scientific exchanges that occur. There are a lot of meetings that FDA attends that those things are a little extra above just doing reviews that really helps advance innovative technologies. And if they're not doing that, that will be a challenge for the innovators.
Yeah, I want to address Peter Marks' departure. The press reported without contradiction that he was asked to leave. He decided instead to resign. It was abrupt. I mean, nobody really anticipated that it would be occurring. Nancy, both you and I know Peter and have dealt with him on a number of occasions. And you wrote an excellent piece in LinkedIn on his departure. So talk a little bit about what his departure and also Patrizia Cavazzoni, who left FDA January 18th, what that means, for not just for FDA, but what it means for medical care in this country. I'm going to broaden it make it that broad.
So I think FDA thrives on stability at the top and leadership. And I think that's something that both Patrizia Cavazzoni and Peter Marks demonstrated. I think that that the staff has to understand the way they want to lead when there are new initiatives, which FDA constantly is trying to improve and do new initiatives. They need that leadership to say what is acceptable to lean into, what is not. There's an evolution of the science that's constantly happening. I think Patrizia did a wonderful job as CEDAR director, but what I've heard is that one of her super strengths was her interactions with her internal teams and the respect that she had internally at FDA. Same thing with Peter Marks, but Peter Marks also had a big external um, uh, ability to communicate where trade associations, patients, people felt like they could reach out to Peter, say they had an issue, and then he would take that internally and see how his team could solve them. And so those are some of the things that people will really miss in that, having excellent science at the top, having teams that are working really hard to, protect the American public. But also, it's that you have to have that external facing person that people can bring challenges or opportunities to. And I think that's something that when you change those and just think it was only about 8 or 9 months ago that Jeff Shuren stepped down from CDRH. So now we're going to have very different new staff running those things. And I think we're really, I've heard that, Cedar is well run with Jacqueline Corrigan Correa, but I think it's something we'll have to watch carefully and make sure that Dr. Makary is putting the right scientists in those roles or the leadership for those centers to really make a difference for patients and for innovators.
The agency has never had a time in which there has been such changeover in senior leadership. There are only two center directors who are holdovers at the moment, and we have no idea how long they will be holdovers. Tobacco and medical devices.
Let me just ask one additional question, shift gears a little bit. One of the things that we don't talk about often is FDA's inspection staff. You've got a few thousand people who are on a daily basis internationally inspecting facilities. A drug or a device cannot be approved until the facility has been inspected. Food inspections are essential to protecting our food supply. I'm going to ask again both of you to talk a little bit about what impact you think this reduction in force will have on inspections. And again, coming back to a practical question, what should a company that wants an inspection because it's got a product pending, what should it do about it? Let me start again with Nancy and then Stuart.
So I think with inspections, that is one of the classifications of FDAers where a lot of them are retirement eligible. And it has also been very hard to recruit for those positions because they're so specialized. Plus, there is that travel component to them. So that is one area where FDA can hardly, it's very hard if FDA loses those people. And we still don't know the number of people who have taken early retirement or the retirement or some of these other opportunities that the administration has given them to leave the agency. But I think inspections, that's one that if I had a product and I was moving through the process with FDA, I'd watch very carefully. And I think, again, you're going to have to communicate with the agency. You're going to have to try to nail down when those things are happening. Do whatever you need to in order to have as clean an inspection as possible.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And on the medical product side, I would do everything I could to make sure that my first inspection was successful, because if there are a shortage of inspectors and the like, getting a reinspection because you messed up the first time, that's not a great strategy. More broadly, there's been talk about the reductions in some of the personnel at FDA who support the work of the inspectors. This is also true on the medical review side. If you get rid of the lab technicians or reduce the lab technicians and the schedules and the project managers and the compliance officers, and you push some of that burden back onto the inspectors or onto the medical reviewers, it makes the job that they're trained to do that much more difficult, because they're having to do all of this important additional work, administrative work, and it's time taken away from the main function. That would be a real problem. If inspectors are having to drive back to labs to drop off samples and then do all those kinds of things instead of going on to the next facility, that's going to be a problem.
1 minute for each of you to sum up. What's step up to 10,000 feet. Nancy?
Well, I think this is a time of unique change. And I think that we're going to see a very different FDA in a year than what we have or what we had, I would say, a few months ago. I think there will be some opportunities for some reforms that may be really helpful for the agency. But I think for any company or anybody following this space, if you have an interest in front of the agency, you're going to have to really be on your top game, and you're going to have to communicate often and clearly, but gently, because there is just such there really is a sensitivity now on a morale issue. And so you're going to have to work very carefully with and pay attention, but also you're going to have to do a better job. You're going to have to be, when you put in a document, make sure your links work, cross reference, try to make sure that you're putting as much, treat it like these people may not have seen this topic before or your product, your document, because you may have a different team looking at it or someone in a new job. So I think it's a time of really paying attention to the agency, not getting crazy about it, but really paying attention and putting your best foot forward and not delaying at filing or doing anything. Just keep things moving quickly and be vigilant.
I think you have to be aware, acutely aware, that there's massive internal change going on at FDA, organizationally and personally. The agency's relationship with the department is in turmoil and will be very different 3 months, 6 months from now than it historically has been. And the agency's relationships with other parts of the government that it routinely works, NIH, CDC, USDA, for example, are all different. So all of us need to be acutely aware that the strategies and the way we've approached things historically might not be appropriate to the current situation. And then the last point would be, if you're not exuding empathy to FDA employees, you're not serving your cause very well, because they are operating under enormous professional and personal stress.
Thank you both for coming on, Nancy and Stuart. I want to thank you both. This is our first ever bonus episode breaker on such short notice, and I hope it provided our listeners with some insights and perspective from people who have been there and who can provide some really insightful remarks.
And thanks to our podcast creator and producer, Michael Levin Epstein, and our assistant producer, Sam Hoffmeister.
And this episode is why we encourage all our listeners to subscribe to FDA Watch. I'm going to end with a commercial for FDAWatch.net. This is an important podcast, especially in these changing times. By subscribing to FDAWatch.net, you can learn ahead of time about new episodes. You can automatically get new shows in your podcast feed. For example, if you already subscribe, you won't miss any of our episodes in our upcoming 3-part series on artificial intelligence in FDA, which we're going to be rolling out in April in collaboration with the Arnold & Porter law firm.
And as we say at the end of every episode of FDA Watch, if you really want to watch what FDA is doing, listen to FDA Watch.